All right, now we're gonna have to clear some things up in this video at some point. Correct the record, so to speak. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it is me, Uncle Lou. Live on YouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Schedule previews. We're going through a bunch of teams, taking a look at their schedules. You know, everybody wants to know what your predictions are for next year on teams and conferences and playoffs and all that. And I'll get to that usually around the end of May, beginning of June. I start putting out prediction videos. But in the age of expanded conferences and, you know, the Pac-12 is gone. All the other conferences are getting bigger. The divisions have gone away. Because of that, schedules are drastically different, even within the same conferences. One team in a particular conference may have kind of an easier schedule. Another team may have kind of a harder schedule. So in terms of predictions anyway, it's not as simple as just going, well, I think this is the best team in this league, so I think they're going to win that league. You got to look at the regular season schedules. And so this time of year, I like to go through as many teams as I can and start to look at their schedules. You know, what are their non-con opponents, potential landmines there? Then you get into the conference schedule. Where are the road games? Which of, you sort of have an idea in your head of sort of which teams, the 4 or 5 teams that might be at the top of a conference. You know, how many of those 4 or 5 teams does a certain team play? Do they avoid them all? Do they only play one of them? Do they have to play all 5 of them? Compared to some other team in the league who maybe dodges them all, right? All of that stuff sort of goes into what becomes prediction videos later on in the offseason for me, into May, beginning of June. So I've got a playlist. I've done, I don't know, about 10 or so of these so far. We're going to do a lot more over the next couple of weeks. But Clemson's up today. Made the playoffs last year because of the expanded playoffs last year. They finished 16th, I think, in the final playoff rankings, but because they won the ACC, they of course got a guaranteed bid into the playoffs. What direction is Clemson heading? Just putting it out there. Tell me in the comments down below. Do you think Clemson is improving? Do you think they're getting worse? Do you think they're kind of treading water? They won a national title in 2018. Well, they won 2 under Dabo, right? They won one in 2016. They won one in 2018. But let's start with 2018. They were undefeated in 2018, 15-0. They won the national title. There's been, 6 seasons since then? 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24. It's been 6 seasons since Clemson won a national title. Let's take a look at what they've done in those 6 seasons. 2018, undefeated, national champion. 2019 through 2024 is 6 seasons. Let's start with 2019. They lost 1 game. It was the national title game, I believe. They lost 1 game in 2019. They lost 2 games in 2020. They lost 3 games in 2021. They lost 3 games in 2022. They lost 4 games in 2023. And they lost 4 games in 2024. Now, they made the playoffs a couple of those years. That is a pretty steady decline over a 6-year period. That's not a blip on the radar. That's not a bump in the road. That's not an outlier season. That's not an anomaly. 0 losses in 2018. And then 1 loss, 2 loss, 3 loss, 3 loss, 4 loss, 4 loss. I mean, Cade Klubnik is back at quarterback for Clemson this year, and he did have a great year last year. He's one of the front runners for the Heisman heading into next season, at least according to the odds. Anyway, Clemson won the ACC behind his play last year, and running back Phil Maffa, who is gone. They're going to have to find a replacement for him, and they got to get better defensively. It was kind of a backwards year for Clemson last year. The offense had been struggling for a couple of years in a row at Clemson, and the defense, it seemed like, was kind of keeping their head above water. But if you look at last year, the defense really took a pretty big step back. You look at their first game of the season against Georgia. Georgia ran all over them, particularly in the second half. And that's particularly notable because Georgia didn't run all over anybody last year except Clemson. That was the worst Georgia rushing offense we've seen in 20 years. And they sliced and diced Clemson. You look at the last game of the year for Clemson against Texas. Texas ran all over them. it was a little bit of an odd year. Now, again, Clemson won the ACC and made the playoffs. They're not some kind of terrible team, terrible program. You know, they're not Florida State going 2-10. They're not struggling to make bowl games. I'm not suggesting that at all. But, you know, when you win 2 national titles in a 3-year period, and then in the 6 years since then, your losses are continually climbing. Again, 1 loss, 2 loss, 3 loss, 3 loss, 4 loss, 4 loss. Those are the 6 seasons since 2018 when they won the Natty. So the defense is going to have to get better in 2025 if Clemson wants to improve. And the offense is going to have to, Cade Clement's going to have to continue to play at a high level. They're probably going to need a couple of those wide receivers to step up to take some of the pressure off the running game because, again, they lose Maffa. And no real, it's not that they don't have an answer after Maffa at running back, but it's going to be a little bit of an unknown. Maffa got the majority of the carries last year for Clemson, and he's gone. So they got to find some answers there. Year 2 for the, or year 3 now, I guess, for the new offensive coordinator. They did bring in a new defensive coordinator as well, which I think was a great hire. Tom Allen out of Penn State, formerly the head coach at Indiana. I think it's a great hire at defensive coordinator. So if you're ready to make your Clemson predictions, you can put them down below. I'm just going to go through the schedule today and kind of give you some of my thoughts on that. Now, they start things off with an SEC opponent at home against LSU. So sort of a battle of the Tigers here, a battle of the Death Valley here. LSU, a lot of expectations for LSU heading into next year. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with a lot of those expectations. They do have a good quarterback in Nussmeier, but they got to get better defensively. They've done a lot of work in the portal, and if some of that pans out, you know, maybe they end up being a pretty decent team. Odd stat here when it comes to LSU. They have not won a week 1 game since 2019. Now, 2020, we didn't have any non-con games, but they lost their first game of the season, an SEC game in 2020. And they have lost 4 straight non-con games to start the season, 21, 22, 23, and 24. So you got to go all the way back to 2019 to find a week 1 win for LSU. And that spans 2 different coaches. So it's not just a Brian Kelly issue. You know, Ed Orgeron was having the same issues there, winning the week 1 games. Of course, LSU won the Natty in 2019, the year after Clemson won it in 2018. And you haven't won a week 1 game since then. So what is that, 5 in a row? 20, 21, 22, 23. Yeah, it's lost 5 straight week 1 games. And this might be the most difficult week 1 game LSU has played during that 5-year stretch. They played Florida State a couple of years ago when Florida State was a good team and lost that game. This is going to be a very difficult game for LSU on the road at Clemson, a tough place to play. 2 really good quarterbacks in that game, Nussmeier and Klubnik. I would expect Clemson to have a little bit of an edge in that game early in the season, big game at home. Either team could win, I think, but I think you kind of maybe lean in a little Clemson when you're looking at that game right now. But difficult start for both teams there. Clemson and LSU, week 1, August 30th. That's a Saturday game. And then another non-con game for Clemson, Troy. They'll be a massive favorite in that one. And then their ACC schedule kicks off with a road game at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech improved under Brent Key versus what they were under Jeff Collins, which was just basically a dead body disguised as a football program. Brent Key does have them heading in the right direction. They lose some key pieces off of last year's team, but we'll see. Georgia Tech was a 7 or 8 win team the last couple of years, looking to improve on that. Not the toughest place to play, Bobby Dodge Stadium in Atlanta. Probably just as many Clemson fans there as there is Georgia Tech. Clemson will probably be favored in that game. Come back home, take on Syracuse. Syracuse surprisingly good last year under first-year head coach Fran Brown. Now they lose their quarterback Kyle McCord off to the NFL, so they got to find a replacement there. But they played a lot of young players last year at a lot of key positions, and the majority of those players are back. Not suggesting Syracuse could win the ACC, but they won 9 or 10 games last year. They were a pretty good team in the ACC. That'll be an interesting game for Clemson there heading into their first bye week. Everybody gets 2 bye weeks again this season, just like they did last year. Come out of your bye week, play on the road at North Carolina, the Fighting Bill Belichick. I still don't understand that hire. I think it's a massive L waiting to happen. I don't think that's going to work. Bill Belichick at North Carolina. I'm willing to be proven wrong. I've been wrong before. If you've been on this channel long enough, you might remember this, but way back in 2019, I picked Georgia to beat South Carolina, and they didn't. They lost. So I have been wrong before. Could be wrong again. Maybe Bill Belichick ends up getting North Carolina to heights yet unseen. But I just don't see it. Other than that game being on the road, Clemson coming off a bye week, any injuries they had early in the season, get a chance to heal up. Clemson will be a big favorite in that one. On the road at Boston College. Now, back-to-back road games can sometimes be tricky. These are young kids that aren't used to traveling a lot of times. You do see upsets on the road in college football quite a bit, particularly the second of the back-to-back road game situations. But again, Clemson is so much more talented than Boston College. It would be a surprise if Clemson were to lose that game. Come back home, play SMU. Now, this is a rematch of the ACC championship game, a game that ended up being really, really good. Really good. And could be a good one again. Clemson gets them at home. That's obviously a massive advantage here. If you look sort of the first half of the schedule through that SMU game, and you kind of, what are the two toughest games? Well, it kind of looks like LSU and SMU, and you get both of those at home. So, schedule working out favorably so far for Clemson through the first half of the season. And that takes you into your second bye week on October 25th. You come out of that, you play Duke. I don't really know what to make of Duke. I mean, I do like Manny Diaz, decent head coach. They got another new quarterback again this year after the other one transferred out. But again, and I know Duke beat Clemson in opening week a couple of years ago, and it was hilarious. But the talent gap between those two is so large, it's hard to kind of see that coming. Clemson will be a significant favorite again at home. Florida State at home. I don't expect Florida State to be a 2-win team again. I also don't expect them to go 13-1 and lose to Georgia by 60 in the Orange Bowl, because I don't expect them to make the Orange Bowl. Maybe they win 7 or 8 games, but they're a far cry from what they were 2 years ago. Clemson will be a favorite at home against FSU. On the road at Louisville, this is probably another one of the more difficult games on the schedule, and this is a road game, so this might be the most difficult one yet, depending on how good LSU ends up being. But you get LSU at home to start the season. This game against Louisville's on the road. Not a very difficult place to play in terms of, if you were to rank like the most difficult places to play in college football, not too many people are going to have Louisville in the top 10, but having to play on the road means you don't get your home field advantage, right? Clemson does have a massive home field advantage. So when it comes to Clemson playing on the road at a place like Louisville, it's not necessarily that Louisville is some impossible place to play. It's that you don't get the benefit of having your home environment, which is a tough place for opponents to play. 2 non-con games to close out the season. Furman at home, and then on the road at Williams-Brice in what has become a pretty interesting series over the last couple of years. South Carolina, after getting beat up by Dabo for what seemed like forever, South Carolina has beat them a couple of times over the last 3 seasons, including last year to close out the regular season on the road in Clemson. So Clemson looking for a little revenge here in Columbia. South Carolina, a bubble playoff team last year. South Carolina actually finished ranked higher than Clemson in the final playoff rankings, but because Clemson was a conference champion out of the ACC and South Carolina did not win the SEC, Clemson, of course, leapfrogged them getting into the playoffs as a conference champion. But that'll be a huge game, like it always is, an in-state rivalry game there on Saturday. Sort of looking back through the schedule here, the Louisville game is on a Friday. That's a little tricky. If you look sort of, last 20 years, Thursday, Friday games, you see a lot of weird things happen. Favorites lose at a higher rate during the week than they do on Saturday. Different travel schedules, different practice schedules during the week. I think that game being on a Friday makes it even more difficult for Clemson than if it was on a Saturday. Not to say that Clemson will lose the game, but I think it being on Friday makes it more difficult than if it were on a Saturday. Non-con schedule, obviously the first game of the season and the last game of the season are what stands out there. 2 SEC opponents. You have LSU at home, South Carolina on the road. Clemson can win both of those games. I think at a minimum, they got to split. At a minimum, they got to go 1-1 there between those two, especially if they're fighting for an at-large bid at the end of the season. Let's say they don't win the ACC and they're fighting for one of those at-large bids. If they had 2 losses to SEC teams, LSU and South Carolina, they'd be hard-pressed to get in. Again, they can beat them both. Just sort of worst-case scenario, you got to go 1-1 there, I would think. The other 2 non-con games, extremely winnable, Troy and Furman. As far as the conference schedules go, at Georgia Tech, as far as road games, at Georgia Tech, at North Carolina, at Boston College. Georgia Tech, the best of the bunch there. But again, Clemson a lot more talented. Second half of the schedule at Louisville, probably your most difficult road game of the season. home games against SMU. That could be interesting. Florida State, we'll see. I'm not very high on them, but, we'll see. The battle of the lawyers, that game there. Who's the loser going to sue in that game? Clemson suing everybody in the ACC and ESPN, FSU suing everybody in the ACC and ESPN. Boy, the loser of that Florida State Clemson game, I don't know who they're going to sue, but a better question might be, who won't they? They might sue everybody. The loser of that, they might sue me. I don't know. They might sue me. Blood from a turnip. I don't know. All right, taters. Appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.